So, as we've been doing with all of the sessions of this series, I now want to take a moment right now to dedicate today's learning to the loved ones in the Pardes family who've been called into service in Israel. So, we're going to be posting a link in the chat that Monica is sharing to the full list of names of folks who are in our community that we're honoring and dedicating the series to. So I now invite all of you, if you would like, to share in the chat now names of any additional loved ones to whom that you would also like to dedicate today's learning. While you're sharing those names, we're going to take the next 30 seconds in silence to set an intention for our learning. So thank you all so much. We'll take 30 seconds in silence right now. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you for taking 30 seconds to set an intention, and thank you to those who have shared the names of your loved ones to whom you want to dedicate today's learning. If you haven't yet submitted the name in the chat that you want to, please continue to do so. And I'm now going to turn it over to Mike Feuer. I'm excited to learn with all of you today.
Okay, thanks so much, Haley. Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, or good morning, good wherever you are. I'm super excited to share with you something which to me is a crucial concept, really at all times, but I feel that current events, the terrible blow that Am Yisrael took on Simchat Torah, really casts a new light on the need, and that need is for heroism, right? And not just for heroism in general, but for Jewish heroism. Now, why do I say that there's a need for such a thing and for specifically Jewish heroism? You may notice that there's a glut of heroism in our media, right? I mean, like Marvel movies without count, and you turn on the television and everybody's a superhero. And of course, everybody knows that, not all heroes wear capes, and the media is filled with the heroic image, but very rarely will you find anywhere that will teach you what heroism is, and specifically how you can access its qualities and characteristics in your own heroic journey, right? And as is always true when it comes to Torah, the Torah works in big concepts, heroism, right? Like every other tradition, but it aims to make them actionable. And so what I want to do is learn a little bit together about a definition of heroism and touch on the points where I feel, at least in the time that's available to us, that we can put our hands around pieces of it that you might be able to put into action in your own life. Because I cannot stress enough, even though the dead pay the ultimate price, and the wounded and the suffering, and even though the communities that were destroyed are on the front line, and you may feel distant from the so-called field of battle, this is a blow that all of Am Yisrael took, and wherever you are, you can be part of not just fixing the blow, but of fixing the world with the very momentum of the blow that we've taken. And I'll explain more as we go forward. So first of all, we need a definition. I'm just going to share my screen here to show you sort of a very basic source sheet. And the definition of heroism that I'm working on is Mesirut Nefesh Lema'an Tov. Now, there's a few words that deserve, in fact, all of them, the explanation. And that's really what I want to do. But a first order translation of Mesirut Nefesh Lema'an Tov is that when Mesirut Nefesh is often translated in English as self-sacrifice. And while that's not inaccurate, I mean, God forbid, soldiers on the battlefield right now are offering the ultimate Mesirut Nefesh. I want to suggest to you that Mesirut Nefesh, in a simpler sense, is going beyond your limited self. And like I said, we're going to take each piece apart. But Mesirut Nefesh is going on, growing beyond, giving more than you perceive your limited self to be capable of giving. And Lema'an Tov is for the sake of good. And we're going to come back to this, but I wanted you to see that, and I want to see the faces that I can see before we pick apart, in particular, that first word of Mesirut. Right? So, Mesirut nefesh lema'an tov, a going beyond limited self for the sake of tov. Now, there's one of those words that's going to get you in a lot of trouble today. There's a certain rhetoric which some people feel empowered around, some people kind of retreat from, about good and evil in our world. And now is not the time to get to the bottom of what tov might actually mean in the Jewish tradition. But what I do want to stress to you is that a particularly Jewish heroism, which doesn't mean exclusively Jewish, I'm just going to correct misconception. Doesn't mean it's not something only Jews can do. It's the Jewish tradition's take on heroism. In theory, anybody can do it. It's just that the deeper and more connected you are to the Jewish tradition, the more you will find the tools at hand to make it your own. So therefore, you have to understand what's tov, right? And if you open up the Torah, there on the front page, so to speak, the very first chapter, which tells the initial story of creation, you will find the word tov, good, as the backbeat to the story of creation. Right? And God saw the light and it was good. And God saw the fish and they were good, and the birds were good, and the skies, it's all good. Which poses a number of problems, in light of the very broken and evil-filled world in which we live. And like I said, we're not going to go into the meaning of Tov right now. I don't think is an empowering approach to what I want to do, but I want to raise it as a question that it's worth it for you to take home and contemplate. Because I think that there's a lot of people out there in the world who feel that there are good things worth living for, good things worth fighting for, good things worth sacrificing for. Right? Our challenge is often is we can't articulate what that good might be. And there's a reason that the initial experience of creation in the eyes of the creator is that it's good. And I'll tell you now that the quest that Jewish heroism pursues, because a hero always has a quest, and the quest that Jewish heroism is pursuing is for the good of creation. And I'm just going to let that hang out there. And please, guys, you guys will connect to the coming Jewish Heroism Project, which is going to be sponsored by Pardesniks and put out on their channels, and it'll be a great thing. And you'll get to engage in depth on what that good is. But for now, I want to actually be a little bit more practical. We're working backwards. What's your nefesh? Now, I know, by the way, I didn't mention that the chat is open there. And if you have a question, you can drop it in the chat. I can't promise that I'll see them all, but I'll try to keep at least half an eye there. But if heroism is Mesirut nefesh lema'an tov, this going beyond nefesh, limited self for the sake of good, so what's your nefesh? Again, in a simple sense, because I want to devote most of our time to Mesirut. That's the action, if you heard in that definition, the going beyond, right? That's what I really want to, but we have to understand the boundaries. Nefesh is usually translated as soul. And that's definitely reflective of biblical use. But you may know that you have 5 souls. Actually, in honest truth, you only have 1 soul, but there are 5 aspects to it. And without going through all of their complexity, your nefesh is where the tire hits the road. Your nefesh is your embodied existence. I want everyone to take a second and put your thumb and fingers together like this. By the way, it's always an important thing to do just to ground yourself, right? Because you're grounding yourself in your nefesh. That little pulse you feel, the tingle of life, maybe even the blood flowing in your veins, that is your nefesh. It's life. It's the vital force. It's why the Torah, by the way, says in repeated places, dam hi nefesh, that your blood is that level of soul. There are other levels, which we could speak about at other times. But most importantly is your nefesh is, like I said, it's where the tire hits the road. It's the embodied aspect of soul. And therefore, even though on one hand, it's your tool for action, right? That's where things get done. We can believe what we want to believe. We can feel how we feel. In the end of the day, we want to change the world. We need to take action, right? And that's why the nefesh is such a crucial aspect of heroism. At the same time, it's limited. I'm one person, right? You put together an army. You need all these people to get anything done. You want to, and there are probably organizational leaders out there. You know that on a certain level, you need numbers to make things happen. And furthermore, I only have 24 hours in the day. I only have so much energy that I can do. I'm limited by my physical and emotional. You hear what I'm saying? This is my limited self. But I do want to remind you that most of us are capable of far more than we can ever dream. I can tell you, I've been an educator for many years. My educational career actually began in outdoor education. Any outdoor education people out there? Just show of hands. Um, okay, I can't see everybody, so I'm going to assume somebody raised their hand. But if you've never been involved in outdoor education, it's not too late, and you should know before you get involved that the watchword, the sort of driving philosophy of outdoor education as an educator, is I believe that you're capable of more than you believe you are. Now, you would never say that to a person because it's condescending. You would just stand with them as they climb the mountain that they don't believe they can climb, as they, put up a tent when they don't think they're capable, as they learn how to paddle a canoe, whatever it is, that challenge that you getting them to grow and go beyond their limited conception of what they're capable of. That is your nefesh, your limited conceptions. And while they may be reflective of real barriers, more often than not, they're simply reflective of the places we haven't challenged ourselves to grow yet, within, of course, reasonable, expectation. So now that we know that Tov is the quest of heroism, the goodness of creation, and you'll have to do some work on your own or wait for the episodes to come out about what that is in the Heroism Project. Nefesh is your limited self. What does it mean to go beyond? To go beyond, to grow beyond your limited self for the sake of good. Well, for that, I want to put up the source sheet and do a little bit of classic learning because it wouldn't be Pardes if we didn't do that. So I'll go back to my source sheet here. And I hope everybody's now seeing that, right? Yeah, we're seeing that. Great. And so what are we looking at? One of the ways in which you can explore the meaning of a word in Torah is what's called the home base approach. You find the first reference, and you sort of go from there. And the first reference of a word in the Torah isn't sort of comprehensive necessarily in its definition, but it's always foundational. Right? The first time it says Shabbat, we know is that God Shabbated. After that, though, we've got a context for how it gets used, and we kind of clarify the definition. In the case of limsor, what does it mean? Our word mesira, it's actually not so easy because its usages are rare and they're not so common. But I circled in on this verse in Ezekiel chapter 20, 37 for reasons I think you'll see why. The prophet says, I've made you pass beneath the shepherd's staff, right? The classic biblical image of God counting each nefesh, each one by one, right? Passing on the shepherd doesn't count the sheep in general. When he says havarti etchem tachat hashavet, right? That it means that each one passes. We use this image, if you recall, on Rosh Hashanah, right? Edre kol baima Rome. That's what it's called. Anyway, the second half of the verse is what we really want. Ve'veitirchem b'mesoret habrit. And there is our word. I brought you into this mesoret of the covenant. Well, first of all, most people are familiar, I don't know, many, with the idea of mesorah or mesoret, meaning tradition. And that opens up for us the first order definition of what limsor as a verb means to hand over. Right? To hand something from one, right? What's called misirot or timsor. My kids when they're playing basketball, pass it to me, right? It's to pass something from one person to the next, which is why tradition is mesoret, because it's that which is passed from generation to generation. Right? But here the prophet is opening up for us a much deeper understanding. So Rashi follows that reading and he says, Masoret the Brit, he says, Brit shemasarti lachem. The Brit that I have given over to you. That's this first Rashi here. Right? And that's our first understanding. So limsor means to hand over. So what does it mean, mesirut nefesh laman tov? What does it mean to be a hero, to take a heroic stance? It means to give yourself over to the good. And on not just your limited self. Meaning what? That you recognize that you belong to a larger whole. Right? And belonging to a large whole, I tell you, I was on Motzei Shabbat this past Saturday night. We here in my community hosted the father of one of the hostages, one of the Chatufim. A very strong voice, which is quite different than a lot of what's being elevated in other places in the media. And he spoke about how in war, in normal life, he said the klal looks out for the prat, meaning the state, the society looks out for the individual in an ideal situation, right? That the individual needs the strength of the state to support them. In war, he said, the opposite happens. Every individual has to be moser atzmo leklal, has to give themselves over to the whole. And by the way, this was in his world to the degree in which he had decided that what mattered was for Israel to be victorious And of course, he wants his son to come home now, not tomorrow. But that's not the most important question in his eyes. And he was very careful not to be judgmental about other people for whom it was the most important question. But what he was saying is, in his mind and in his understanding of Torah, that Mesirat Nefesh L'man Tov, he didn't use my definition, but that giving over one's limited sense of self for the sake of good is an understanding that I am limited and that there's a bigger picture. But on a simple level, also, I want you to understand that the action of heroism always involves giving. Mesirat Nefesh L'man Tov means that you are going to give something, your time, your energy, your focus, your care, your prayers, your money, your ideas, whatever it is. So be prepared to give. And remember, by the way, a lot of the times our giving is limited by our limited conception of self. Right? In the Heroism Project, I will dive deeply into what's called the heroic moment. We're often faced with a moment in our own lives, in our family context. Right now, we're facing one as a people, a moment where there's a potential for heroism. And that potential isn't always realized. Not in my life, not in my family, not in the nation, not in the world. But what makes it come to fruition is our ability to hand ourselves over to it, sometimes even beyond our limited conceptions. So that's the first understanding of Mesirah. The next understanding that this verse offers us comes from the Metzudat David. He's an 18th century commentary that focuses primarily on simple meaning grammar. So how does he define our term? That when Isaiah says, I will bring you into the Mesoret Abrit, he actually is the source of the translation that's there, which is, he says, B'isurei Kesher Habrit. He says that there's actually an aleph missing, which, if you're familiar with Hebrew grammar, for an aleph to disappear from a word is not uncommon or certainly not unreasonable. And le'esor with an aleph is to bind something. So he says, what? I will bind you in the connections of this covenant, meaning you'll never again leave it. Leaving aside the challenges that poses, by the way, in terms of what it means to be a Jew, right? It's we signed up at Sinai. You don't get to check yourself out, apparently. And that's a truth of Jewish history, which is often uncomfortable. And I think many people are feeling it today. I think many people out there in the world who, not God forbid, wanted to forget they were Jewish, but didn't necessarily consider a definitive, or certainly not the most definitive aspect of their life, are feeling like, either because of people around them or because of some upwelling within themselves, that they're way more bound up and connected with this story than they realized. And that is an opportunity for heroism. Limsor nafsham leman tov is not just to give themselves over to that good, but to bind themselves to it. Right? And not only that, but to look around and see how we're bound to one another. And that's a way in which we accept that our limited conception of self must be expanded, that we're bound together, right? If people are familiar with this idea, Kol Yisrael arivim ze lezeh, right? All Israel are guarantors one for another. It has beautiful sort of poetic or sort of like mythic midrashic explanations about all of Israel being one body. And when you stub your toe, my foot hurts. And they're beautiful ways. But there's something else you need to understand, particularly about Israeli society, is that there's another perspective on this, which isn't just when you stub your toe, my foot hurts, but that when, God forbid, someone eats a cheeseburger, I get a stomachache. Meaning we have a collective responsibility for bringing Torah into the world. Now is not the time and place to argue about what's Torah, what's not Torah, who has authority to define what includes in Torah. We're Pardes. All I'll say is this, is you don't have, I'll put it in the positive, you have a responsibility to figure out where you're bound to Torah. And wherever you are bound to this covenant, that is the place where you have an heroic opportunity to go beyond and grow beyond yourself, whether it's in more learning, whether it's in more actions, whether it's in connecting to the people around you because you're part of the same story. But there's a binding aspect. So we have, first of all, Rashi's explanation, limsor is to give over. And either that's just a giving over myself to the greater good, or it's an action of giving time, energy, money, attention, emotional care. Right? Then there's the Metzudat David, who tells us, well, this Mesor Brit, limsor, means to bind myself. which is an even more powerful because that can give over, but there's still some consensual relationship in giving over. Once I bind myself, as he says, shelo tetsu od mimena, that you will never again be free of it. And that's a heavy, heavy thing. And especially, parents like myself who have children of college age. I mean, my college age children are in the army right now, but American parents who might have college age children, I think it's important to discuss with them this idea that we're bound together as a people, not necessarily by choice. That's a foreign notion to many. Maybe it's a foreign notion to many people listening right now. I'm not telling you it's true and you must believe. I'm telling you it's serious and you must think about it. Right? Okay, last piece here. I'm watching the clock because wow, time flies. Last piece is from Midrash called Sechel Tov. It's a later Midrash. Maybe some other time I'll go on my geeky Midrash fascinating tour and we'll talk about where it came from and when it was redacted. But for now, it's a piece that illuminates for us another face of what Mesirut Nefesh, of what this giving over of limited self is and how we might do it. So Reish Lakish says, it says Brit b'melach, there is a covenant regarding salt. V'nemar brit b'yisurin, right? And he doesn't. I didn't bring actually the source text when it refers to a covenant with salt. But if people are familiar, that God promises Aaron, Moshe's brother, the first high priest, right, a brit melach. There'll be a salted covenant, not salty, but salted, a salted covenant, meaning a lasting covenant. But Reish Lakish does something else with it. He says there's a connection between a covenant of salt and a covenant of suffering. Now, why suffering? Dichtiv, what's his proof test for suffering? It's our verse. I'll bring you, and I just took the translation from the text here. I'll bring with you in the bond of the covenant, is what I said here. But you know what he just told you? That Mesorah there actually means I'll bring you into the suffering of the covenant. And this is the piece that I really kind of want to end on, is that if heroism in the Torah is a stance of Mesirut Nefesh L'man Tov, a giving over, a growing beyond, an expanding of my limited self for the sake of good, and that means the giving over, it means the binding to the larger picture, but it also is going to hurt. All growth happens in a state of discomfort. And the good news is we're all uncomfortable now. God forbid, I'm not telling you to go out there and find sources of suffering in your life. My guess is most people don't need it. But what I am telling you is that there's a power that this midrash tells us about of how we can transform suffering into a source of positive action. Because Reish Lakish goes on, he says, just as salt sweetens, literally meaning makes palatable the offerings, so does suffering cleanse the body of man. Interesting. Why? Well, I'll tell you that the Pardesniks Rebbe, the great Hasidic Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto, who was taken to Treblinka in 1942, if I'm not mistaken, right? He said that the danger of suffering is that it narrows us, right? When a person is suffering, it's very easy to shut out everything which isn't immediately important, shut out the people that aren't immediately present. Suffering narrows us. He says, but actually what suffering can do is scrape away the boundaries and give us the power to truly connect. And that's why Reish Lakish says that it can be cleansing. It can take the nefesh, which remember, without your nefesh, where the tire hits the road, you can't do any action, you can't give, you can't grow, you can't go beyond, you can't bind yourself to anything. But if it's just the nefesh, if it's that limited conception of self, then your ability to be a hero will forever be limited. And therefore, you must grow. You must take the risks. You must give more than you believe that you have in some realm of life. And as he goes on, he talks about assisting the sick with their body, their money, and their prayer. Right? At the end of the Midrash is that's why all the children of the covenant must visit the sick of their people. And if you have ever done Bikur Cholim, in the midst of visiting the sick, you know that on one hand, it's easy, right? Just drive up to the hospital, get out and go. This is not a simple thing. To be together with someone who makes you uncomfortable. To be emotionally present to someone who challenges your sense of what's normal and right. And not just with your body, but with your money. Those of us who have more have an obligation to give to those who less, and through our prayer. And prayer is a big topic, which I can't really delve into completely right now. I just want to see your faces as we finish. But I will say this, is that there's a reason that our sages call prayer avodah shebelev, the service of the heart, because the hero always moves from the heart. And if you want to understand how it is that you can tap into the power of Jewish heroism and know how to go beyond and grow beyond that limited sense of self for the sake of good, right? So you just saw give, bind yourself to the larger picture and people, and then be willing to risk and even suffer a little bit for the sake of the growth, which can make you more than really you believe you could be. So I'm going to stop there because there was a request that I leave a minute either for questions, or I think that Monica wanted to update people on what's coming. But I thank you for your attention. Stay tuned for the Pardes content that's coming on the Jewish Heroism Project. You can even check out the new webpage, jewishheroism.com. It's the splash page is up. Happy to hear feedback. And everyone should stand strong, and we should be blessed to see our soldiers and the captives come home safely soon, and a better future for everyone between the river and the sea.
Thank you, Mike, from your mouth to God's ears. So just a real quick update, and then I can, if Mike's able to stay on for questions, we can have a minute or so. Thank you for everyone for being here today. We will not have our usual Thursday session this week because it is Thanksgiving, but we will be back here next week, Monday, same time, same place, and keep an eye out for who our special speaker will be. It's been wonderful sharing these sessions with you. And now I will turn it back to Mike if we have questions. And I will, if you're done, feel free to hop off, continue with your day. If not, I will give everybody the opportunity to chime in and ask what's on their minds.
It's very sweet, all the thank yous that I'm getting here in the chat. I really appreciate it. Go out and do a little bit more for each other today. That's probably the best response that I can recommend. It doesn't seem like there are questions. So people, I'm Mike F at Pardes if you ever want to reach me. And otherwise, like I said, everyone should be healthy and well, and God bless. Thanks for the opportunity.